And he's also said you will have the access to the knowledge of Creator.
It's amazing that he said a couple workshops back that we are going to be allowed to remember how we transmuted and through the interactions and the divisions to get to this point we are now. At this point, we've forgotten where we've come from, but we know where we're going back to, I think, in a more bigger way. Alex, it looks like you're ready. Anyone else would like to say something they felt or they've sensed from what we've just seen? I know there's many dimensions. Go ahead, Dan.
You have the question in the chat regarding the pain pen.
I do have an old pain pen and I have ordered a new version. Can I use them together or do I have to buy two of the new versions? I'm thinking you need to buy two of the new versions. The first one was rather local. It didn't penetrate that far, and it didn't. This is an enhanced version of the pain pen. So I would say that you can try it. As Mr. Kesh says, let us know, see what you discover. But I know Misty earlier on had said she used the pain pen she had with the pain pad. She wasn't sure if it was a new one or, as I said, an older one, because it was given to her or loaned to her to use. But it worked rather well. Did you hear the same, Ed?
Yes, I did. I opened my mic because I had a comment on listening again to Mr. Kesh share about the vision enhancement unit. One of the things I keyed in on is that he indicated that the fields from the vision enhancement unit would interact with the plasmatic hormones that are in between the soul and the physicality.
Yeah. He said the soul would be in the center and you would wear it, of course, across your eyes. But it was for the hormones, as I understood, that are produced through fields of the soul into the glands.
Well, but the thing I keyed in on is it wasn't the physical hormones, it was the plasmatic hormones, which is, you know, in the energetic level before they actually become physical.
Right.
So, so in that sense, to me, it communicated that, you know, it's an interaction between the physicality and the soul, and that's why he was so non-committal on what it would do for the physical vision, because it's a decision between the two and what you want and what you expect. And he kind of repeated that several times.
Yeah, it's what you expect from it, he said, yes.
Yeah, and that made sense to me since it's at the plasmatic level that it's interacting with the plasmatic hormones rather than on the level of physicality. So that was my input.
Thank you, Ed. Anyone else want to add to the knowledge? As this is a collective knowledge, that's what he was saying, that we all share knowledge together. It's a collective of the knowledge as we share unconditionally what we know and what we think we understand. Does that mean there are very few orders for the new pain pen in this group? I know I have one of the older pain pens, which sometimes it seems to be effective and other times it doesn't seem to be as effective. And again, it may be just the condition or my self-empowering it with my fields, what I'm expecting from it. But of course, the new version is obviously an enhanced level. Okay, I see a red maple leaf. Alex, are you ready?
Good day, Mark, and good day, everyone.
Thank you, Alex, for being here and continuing to share.
Today is a very interesting day, and I think by the time you finish with this presentation, you'll know what the word interesting really means. We have so many converging forces coming together, and in many ways, we're really trying to keep up with the knowledge seekers workshops, which are racing ahead. And so it's always a challenge on how we keep up.
He does seem to jump 500 years ahead or more every time.
Yes, we only have a week to get ready.
For the next one, right?
Yes.
But these two, the 376 and the 377, he said the 77 was more of a follow-up or an enhancement or a combination of the two. And he said, normally we don't do this. So he's gone into deeper understanding in the second one of what he presented in the 376.
That's true. I do that frequently, and then the reason for that is because I'm trying to embellish the knowledge to a greater degree. At the same time, I'm trying to condense the over 3,000 hours of teaching that we have down into a few classes. And as all knowledge seekers, you know, we're kind of groping in the dark because we are pioneers in so many different ways, and pioneers in the true sense of the word pioneers. We are not sponsored by any kind of colonial endeavor, and we are all volunteers pretty much at this point in time. And we have a lot of sorting out to do. And it finds that the more we know, the more we have to sort out. And then overall, we see how much really there is more to learn. This is not a bad thing, but what we are trying to do, and by the end of this session today, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. Mark, I got to do some business, if I may, please.
Would you like me to play the disclaimer, Alex?
Sure, Mark. That would be great. Thank you.
Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Okay, that was the Canadian version of the disclaimer, although it sounded very similar to the American version. Go ahead, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Welcome, Canadians, Americans, Mexicans, to the North American Corona team meeting, and also to the international community. And we're talking about all the other continents as well. So as we get into this process, we understand that we are dealing with universal knowledge as presented by Marin Tebakoli-Kesh, who is the father in modern plasma science. And as such, this is the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings in plasma science. We have moved on to what I call basic understanding. And to understand the plasma as it precedes the physical. One of the things that was shocking to me, because when I got up this morning, I found that today is DNA Day. It is actually a holiday in the United States. So I hope you're enjoying your holiday. Generally speaking, oh, you know what? This is not a forum for commentary or opinions. But what is interesting is I had no idea, never heard of this before. April 25th is DNA Day.
This is the first time I'm hearing of this.
Shocking, considering that the DNA was technically discovered many decades ago. So, you know, when I look at the basic understanding cycle and what I've been trying to do, it almost seems as if, you know, I had some kind of premonition, because last week we described the Krebs cycle, and I was going to move ahead on this because the Krebs cycle is very much part of the DNA. And of course, the X, Y, and Z axis are very much part of the Krebs cycle. And what we're, ironically, the last 2 weeks, as you mentioned, the Knowledge Seekers workshops have been talking about hormones, and this is something that I will be talking more about in the future. So all of this has to do with the universal order of creation of matter as outlined in book number 1. And the key point, and I like to make this every time, is that although we're drawn to these classes through the cups of life, what we really want to do is to understand the creation of the universe. And, you know, how does our tiny perfect world fit in with the rest of the universe? So basically, all things exist from energy, including the universe. And so when we talk about energy, it is defined as a charge in motion. And this energy is always in motion. And we always have to ask, in motion as compared to what? Because things have to do with relationships. And so we try to begin the basic teaching by understanding basic terminology so that we can discuss this, not to substitute words in the wrong context, but to use words properly, so that when we discuss things that we create a mental image. See, the words are man-made, the mental images are made, and the plasma science is universe-made. And so there has to be a connection. And so we went through a variety of terminologies, but the fundamental thing is that the plasma science is a natural science. Plasma is natural. There's nothing more natural than plasma. And then we had to understand some more terminology as we got into more specifics. Many are not interested in this, but you know, it does help to fill in the rest of the picture, if you will. And so we discussed principal matter, amino acids, star formations, plasma states, and dynamic plasma states. And now we've touched on residue and conversion. And we will be embellishing those subjects more as we go. But some of the subjects that we have been discussing in the past, and then we have to review them because now they're becoming to the forefront more. And so we've always talked about an energy parceling unit. And we see that not only is principal or PM ticks, which are energy packs, but they are parceling units that travel. And one of the parceling units that is on this planet is the water molecule. And as a molecule, it is a combination of two elements, hydrogen and oxygen. And we found and we discussed in great detail how the the fact that the water molecule is the universal solvent, there's that word again, universal, and as a solvent, it means it gives and takes energy very freely, and it is why life is possible on this planet. Another terminology that I have brought up is sequence providing. And this sequence providing is actually very essential because a lot of people think that the universe is chaotic. Life on this planet is chaotic because we don't have this fulfilling understanding that we need. And we find that really, when we look into the sky every night, we see that it is very well organized. And the reason it's well organized is because it understands these sequencing. And so when we get into the structure of the Krebs cycle and what causes the Krebs cycle, which is the basis of the cytochrome A, B, and C, which each one produces 12 ATP, which are 8 adenosine triphosphate, we find that these are energy sequence providers, kind of like the plasma sequencing that we've been describing in the basic teachings. And so we do have a condition that if we follow this sequence, we have healthy cells where they have a total of 36 ATP produced from one glucose molecule. But we find that in the center cytochrome, the cytochrome B, we have a deficiency. When we go out of sequence, when we go out of sorts, we produce an unhealthy cell. And so we have a deficiency, and it is only 26 ATP. And unfortunately, in terms of creation, the creation has to come, it's all or none kind of thing, because once you have a MAGRAV, you've created a condition. On the process to creating a MAGRAV, there has to be a dimension building. And so one of the fundamentals of dimension building in the, physical science, we call this the piezoelectric effect. And what that is, and every bodybuilder understands this, every bodybuilder should understand this, is the surface to volume ratio of what causes bending. And whether it's a bending or a stressing, it amounts to the same thing. It creates a second dimension where we have the polar opposites of positive and negative charges. And so this is the basis of the dimension building. And if we carry on with that, we get into what we see as the plasma building, where we have the X and Y axis. The X involves the rotation and the Y axis involves the polarity. But it's the Z axis which involves the field strength. And once we have this basis, this is the beginning of the plasma. And the plasma begins at the core. And at that point in time, it has to determine some kind of positioning. And the questioning is, position to what? And so this is where the dynamism comes in. What we refer to as dynamic plasma, there has to be an interaction with another plasma. And to have an interaction with another plasma, energy has to flow not only within, but also without. And in other words, it has to go in between. And the way this energy flows is that it actually has a motion, and that motion determined on the direction is the charge. And it follows a certain dimension, which we call the geometry. Well, so we understand the physical geometries, but there are also soul geometries, and there are emotional geometries. And so with the emotional geometry, we now understand that we have other references: creation, co-creation, procreation. And then we also understand that there is an outer space and there's an inner space. And we operate on this inner space. And that is the range on this planet. And we also operate within our own bodies. And that is the range within our bodies. And so to be able to transcend between the physical and the plasma, this is the skill, these are the skills that we have to learn to not only be able to transcend from our physical to our plasmatic, but we don't really have to do that so much as just have an awareness that we are actually plasmatic, and what we need to do is to figure out how do we transcend into the physical. One moment, please. So we summarize the bringing together of a maggraph, whether it be physical or plasmatic. The source is the PM ticks, which are traveling through outer space. These are the energy packs. They interact together and they form antimatter, dark matter, and matter, which we've now renamed principled matter, transition or transmission matter, and light matter. And the combination of these three create the various dimensions which combine together create a maggrav condition, which is a balanced condition. And at that point, then we have now the core component, which is what we call the neutron. And the neutron, what you're looking at, is the gravitational component or the maggrav condition, which allows the buildup of the plasma. And how far does the plasma build up? So the thing about the plasma is it's a manifestation of energy, you see. But we have an old science, which is small m matter, and a new science with capital M matter. And so there's a bit of confusion. Matter, you see, regardless, is a manifestation of energy. And so this manifestation initially is a binding when two forces come together. But manifestation is also a creation where 1 and 1 is more than 2. So we find that in the process of energy creation, which is energy binding, that energy binding itself is creation. And that's not double talk. That's just trying to differentiate between when we talk about matter plasma, we see that matter plasma is physical because we can touch it and see it, and capital M matter state is plasmatic. We can't touch it, we cannot see it, but we absolutely can sense it. And these are the questions that we ask ourselves in the scientific community and the spiritual community. How do we do this? And this is where the light matter comes in. And so when we're trying to ascertain various explanations, we seem to, shall we say, gravitate towards the physical explanation for a plasmatic precedence. And so we said in the previous teachings that the plasmatic manifestation is a substrate for the physical manifestation, right? And so the plasmatic manifestation precedes the physical manifestation. There is no rule that says that the plasmatic manifestation has to manifest into the physical. So we have options. And then the other explanation that we try to figure out is, how do we fit into this thing? And so our point of view comes into play here. And as we've always said, we've been looking at things upside down. And when I say looking at it from upside down, in other words, from the Earth's point of view, where the Earth, we're on the ground because it's gravitational, and we're looking into the sky because it's magnetical. But we were able to transition the various energy states and within these ranges. And we're also able to transmit these energy states across the ranges. So we can transition and we can transmit. And we have a physical reality and we have a non-visible reality. And so there is a third state, and that is the transmutation, that is the transmutation state. So this is when we see that two forces coming together, they create a condition where there's a field interaction, and that interaction begins with an x-axis. You add to that the y-axis, and then you add to that the third dimension, which is the z-axis. Now you have a maggrav condition, and then we go from there. Before we go from there, the energy has to be maintained somehow. So the energy flows constantly. Energy is always in motion. So how do you keep the energy within the maggrav condition? It has to go through this rotating field. Is this rotating field only on the x-axis, or is it on the y-axis as well? Come to think of it, is it on the z-axis as well? So when we look at a charge, and this is a picture of a charge that you cannot see, but you see that it has an outside and it has an inside and it has an interaction. But more than anything else, it does go in two different directions. And this is the uniqueness and the difference between the old science and the new science. You see, the old science discussed direction of flow in one direction. The new science discusses direction of flow in two directions. So the balance of these fields is the energy totality of the energy flowing in both directions. The charge is the difference in field strength of one direction over another direction. And this is where the plasma positioning comes into play. And so we find that, thank God for us, the basic DNA understands this. So because today is an important day, we're going to delve into this subject a little bit more. And we've talked about a backbone. And so we find that carbon is the connector. And we discussed phosphates and we discussed sugars. And so now what we see is that carbon is in a sugar phosphate backbone. And this backbone is the basic construct of the DNA. So this involves hydrogen, oxygen, and phosphorus. And when we looked at the body-centered tetrahedrons, of the many things that we discussed, everything from the organs of the body to the endocrine system and the various energies associated, including our environment, which involves the Earth's crust. And we see these tetrahedrons and how they seem to replicate in various ways. So we find that chlorophyll, for instance, which is the energy for plants, is in the tetrahedron, and the phosphate, which is the energy for us, is also in the tetrahedron. And we find the hemoglobin, which is our currency within our bodies, we call the blood, is also in the tetrahedron. These are all mag-rav reactors. And so the science has been trying to work it out. And so today is National DNA Day, April 25th. And it's a holiday. So, but we're going to continue working here. This is a National DNA Day in the United States, and it commemorates the day in 1953 when Watson and Crick and others published papers on the structure of the DNA. And so this began what they called a scientific frenzy, not to be confused with a Gans freakout. But this scientific frenzy from 1953 to today has not been able to answer a few questions. And I have a few questions. And one of those questions I've asked in the past is, why do we have the DNA the same in all the cells in our body, but we have different cells? Why do we have the DNA the same in our two thumbs, but our thumbs are opposing? And then why are we still looking for cures for cancer? You see, the thing is, in what we did discover was that, and this is important, was a discovery of a double helix, which is a twisted ladder structure. And we call DNA deoxyribonucleic acid. And there's that word acid. And this was a milestone in history of science. And so this had to do with understanding how genes control the chemical processes within. And as you can see, this was the basis of the physical science. So we said that the DNA backbone is a carbon and a sugar phosphate backbone. And we said that phosphate is a tetrahedron combined with oxygen. And the question that I have to ask all the time is, does a jellyfish have a backbone? And I wonder if some humans have a backbone. But anyway, getting back to the basic DNA, we find that the ladder, the way it's constructed, is actually a two-way street. That's kind of interesting, kind of like plasma physics. But, you know, we have these pairs, things that are pairing up, and I'm going to discuss that in another class. But these letters here that you see, GCAT, and the repetitive combination of these is what we call basic components of the DNA. So the C actually has no sugar in it. It is a hexagonal format. So this is a graphic representation of cytosine. And there'll be no exam at the end of this class, so you just all everybody relax. Another component, of course, is thymine, and it too has a hexagonal formation, and it too does not have any sugar. Why do I mention that? Because when we get into adenine, we find that there is a sugar that's present. And so what is a sugar? And so we look at this pentagon that is attached to this hexagon. So the pentagonal formation is representative of a sugar molecule. And the hexagonal formation is a cellular formation. So the hexagonal formation is an intermediary between the two. And we discussed that and introduced that last week. And we're going to discuss that more next week. But we find that guanine also has sugar present. So there's a similarity to all of these things. And you may have noticed that in all of these, we have Mr. Cohen is still here, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and they are in presence in various combinations. And isn't that interesting? So in 1990, which is a long time from 1953, we began the Human Genome Project. And this was sponsored by the National Research Council, which is Canadian. And it was officially started with the US Department of Energy, which is American, and the National Institute of Health, which is English. And so they have this plan on trying to identify the 3.2 billion combinations of the DNA. And what is interesting, I say it's interesting because there are 7 billion people on this planet. So we find 3.2 billion combinations accounting for only twice as many people on this planet. It's just roughly a 2-to-1 relationship. I'm using accounting principles here to round off, what they call the fudge factor. So 2-to-1 relationship between the number of codons in the DNA and the number of people on this planet. But again, interestingly, there are over 73 trillion cells in our body, which is 2 times 10 to the 4th orders of magnitude more than the number of codons in the DNA structure. And of course, it's also 10 to the 4th times the number of people on this planet. And so we say the variety is the spice of life. And so we're wondering why we're doing all of this research. And then when you go through the internet and look on Wikipedia, and you see all the studies that have gone through over these years. So, and you see, why is this important? Well, I have a personal story, and that is on May the 5th, which is coming up shortly, is when I discovered how to get rid of cancer. That was in 1991. And so in a couple of weeks, I will have my 30th anniversary of knowing this. And what it's done for me, not only has it brought my health back, but eliminated this worry in my family so that we can sleep at night with peace. And the cups of life have done the same thing with respect to the coronavirus. And there is a connection between the cups of life and the cancer as well. But we're not going to discuss that today. What we are going to discuss is that not much has happened in the last 30 years because we're still looking for the same solutions to the same problems. And the question for me was, why do I need to know this? I just wanted to get rid of this problem in my family, which, from what they say in Canada here, it costs roughly $350,000 a year for cancer treatment, and then 50% of the population will have cancer. I don't know why we're still discussing this, but why is the answer not the question, remember? And so what we did know is about the mitochondria. And what is interesting about the mitochondria, we call it the nature's blast furnace. And that is because this adenosine triphosphate, which we keep talking about, is actually produced within the mitochondria. And so please excuse my artistic capability here, but what I want to do is focus on the most important things to understand about the mitochondria. So in the inner structure, we see the numerous number of bends in the surface. Each one of these bends is a negative charge, and the mitochondria has copious quantities of bends. And so we create an energy field in each one of these bends. So you can see there's a whole lot of action going on. And then when you look at the outside, which is represented by the orange line, and that is a separate boundary, it is much smoother. So we see that there's a gradient difference between the energy that is created in the center. I wonder if it's the plasmatic center. The energy center and the outside. And then there's an outside, again, represented by the green line, which is the physical boundary of the mitochondria. And where's this mitochondria? Smack dab in the middle of every cell. And what is interesting, of course, is that mitochondria within the cells is present within the animal kingdom, and which we call the horizontal people, and the vertical people, which we know are plants. And you know, the thing about it is that, fortunately for us, the difference between the plants and the animals and the humans is represented in the DNA. Okay, so the DNA is different in all these things. And so this DNA, there is a human genome DNA, and it is associated with the RNA. And we haven't even talked about that because we're still dealing in the basic plasma construction. The basic plasma constructions comes from the X, Y, and Z axis, but that has to do with its positioning and its retention, its ability to retain the energy. And that energy is retained through rotating field. And now you understand that there is a boundary, except that this boundary, whether if it's a physical boundary, cannot contain the plasma. In fact, the plasmatic boundary cannot contain the plasma because it all depends on field strength. So now we get into the dynamic plasma. So there has to be a basic construct of the dynamic plasma, and then there has to be a positioning of the dynamic plasma with another plasma. And so we have this interaction of various fields, and each field has a basic construct of antimatter, dark matter, and matter. And then there is always a possibility of understanding, are we upside down or are we right side up? So in other words, when we're looking at these two plasmatic constructs, are we back to back, or are we head to tail, or are we head to head? So these are all possibilities. And these are affecting how we go through the various dimensions. And as we built up the various dimensions in the previous classes, and we've seen a relationship between our earthbound condition and our dynamic plasma condition, we find that how we grow through these various dimensions is through connections. And so we understand that in our physical environment, the carbon is the connector. But we also now know that the plasmatic connector is also carbon. Is the physical carbon and the plasmatic carbon one and the same thing? And this is where we run into trouble with the periodic table of elements, you see, because the basis of the periodic table of elements was the definition of mass, which is limited by the speed of light, which is limited by the physical condition of the environment on this planet, which is the interaction of our plasmatic fields with the inertia of this planet. And if I'm going too fast, it's because we have to understand that terminology and how it goes in a sentence. and the sequence is important. And so what we see is this periodic table of elements is in a sequence. It's an arithmetic sequence. It goes from 1, which is hydrogen, and we move all the way up to, well, the most important things is Mr. Cohn, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. And we use in the cups of life, copper and zinc are 2 of the most important elements in the cups of life, the basic cups of life. And we find that silicon is the basic difference between us and the planet. We are carbon-based, so we are organic, and Earth is silicon-based. It's inorganic, and too much information is crowding into too small a space. But we also have the emergence of the importance and now the relationship understanding of how phosphorus, sulfur, and chlorine come into the whole process. What we do know about chlorine is that in combination with sodium, it's provides salt, which is kind of the medium that we're using in the cups of life. And today we're discussing the phosphorus, which is part of the ATP, which is part of the DNA cycle. So we find that all these things have relationships, but these relationships are fundamentally energies that we call magnetical, gravitational, seeking a balance, which we call a magram. And then these relationships that we see, the old science, we have a scientific understanding, and we have a spiritual science, endeavoring to achieve the same kind of understanding, but using a different terminology. And so what we're looking is to add the 2 together, because the combination, 1 and 1 is going to give us more than 2. We find that when we manifest matter, we have cell creation. And how many cells do we create? And so let's face the facts, folks. We have over 70 trillion cells in our body, but we have 1 body. And how do we organize that? It requires an awful lot of work. And thank God our soul is taking care of that. And what the soul is doing is actually converging and doing a conversion of the light matter. Where's the light matter coming from? And that is the source. And so we find that the interaction of the energy coming from the source, interacting with the inertia of our environment, creates what we call a plasmatic air. And in that plasmatic air, we have plasmatic nitrogen, and we have plasmatic hydrogen, and we have plasmatic amino acid. But we also have physical nitrogen, physical hydrogen, physical carbon, and physical oxygen. So there is some kind of connection. And so this is how we transmit energy. We do this through our DNA transcription. And at this point in time, we call that our consciousness. But we find that when we are in a comatose condition, we are actually unconscious, but we somehow maintain our physicality. So we find that the initiator in the DNA is methionine, which only comes from red meat. And the red meat, of course, is animal matter. And it's kind of interesting that that is an important factor. But is that the factor? Because we see that we have questioned whether we have evolved on this planet or whether we have adapted on this planet. So, we have kind of differentiated between essential and non-essential foods. And all that means is that essential foods need to be eaten and non-essential foods are foods that we produce. Well, how do we produce this if, we don't need to eat them? And where does this energy come from? And one of the most important components, which we haven't even discussed yet in any detail, is that calcium is considered non-essential, except if you have osteoporosis, and then it's considered very essential. And the reason for that, of course, is that calcium is alkaline. And so how is that going to affect everything? We'll talk about that later. But when we look at the transition of energy, transition from where? Well, we're not going to discuss that in great detail here, except to reference karma, which is kind of a carry forward. And so this is the knowledge that we arrived here with, and it is transcribed in our RNA. And this is our unconsciousness. So at this point in time, we can't remember our unconsciousness. We can't remember our before being born time. But you know, we when we discuss growth and we look at, we're looking at this RNA and DNA interaction, how can we have a DNA growth and not have an RNA growth? And so on DNA Day, I think what we have to really understand is that the whole purpose of the Genome Project was to facilitate gene therapy and gene modification. And, you know, seriously, this world is in a mess and outer space is well organized. How do we have the audacity to claim that we can do this and we can do a better job than, shall we say, nature can? So this is really gene mutilation. What we're doing with the plasma science is restoring. It's called plasma science restoration. So one of the fundamental things that we have with respect to how we exchange energy within our body, when we look at the basic amino acid, the essential acid, the most essential being alpha-linolenic acid, which is slightly alkaline actually, but it facilitates a bending, and this bending facilitates energy coming in and going out. So when we say energy coming in, physically we're saying food coming in and waste going out, okay? But that is in the physical state. Who is the brains behind this? And how did you manage to train this? And if it malfunctions, what are you going to do to correct the situation? And since you have 73 trillion cells, and each one of these is a part, what this is one part, one leg of a phospholipid. So you have 73 trillion cells that are encapsulated by these phospholipids. And we have, in one pair of phospholipids, we have 4 legs. So if we only had one phospholipid around the cell, that would be 270 trillion legs. But that's not true, because we have many phospholipids around our cells. So my calculator's broken, I don't know. All I know is that inside the cell and the outside of the cell is a kind of communication. And so we call that a transition. And so when we're transiting energy, we're going from the gravitational to the magnetical. And so in this case, the magneticals are facing each other. And so there's energy coming from the outside in and from the inside out, and there is an exchange. I wonder how this exchange is being done. So when we review the ganses, we find that the 3 ganses that we're most preoccupied with, the carbon dioxide, zinc, and copper gans, all have an oxygen component. So oxygen is present. We call that an aerobic condition. And when we look at the absence of oxygen, we see in our iron gans, it's only CH3. And that is just one of the many ganses that we have. But this, what I want to draw attention to is that this is anaerobic, no oxygen. So oxygen is kind of a key component. So when we look at how we get energy from food, food is basically glucose. And what we do is convert the glucose to fructose. And how we do that is through phosphorylation. Now, that fructose that we consume is not the fructose that you see on the label of your food packages. We are actually looking at the glucose, which is a hexagonal construct. And the terminating points, the ends, the meeting points, which are all negatively charged, are phosphorylated. In other words, they flip around. And so when the glucose phosphorylates into fructose, that fructose is not the same fructose that you see in the label of your package. this fructose is digestible. The fructose that you see on the label package is not digestible. So when we eat raw fructose, non-phosphorylated, then that becomes a toxin. But when we phosphorylate the fructose, that becomes food. And the key component of phosphorylation is phosphate. So when we look at ATP, which is the currency of life, so in biology, that one glucose molecule produces 36 ATP. What a deal. I go to the bank and I put $1 in there and I get 2 cents, maybe. 1 to 36. What a deal. So we find in the cytochrome environment that is healthy, that is aerobic. In other words, it has oxygen. When we look in an unhealthy environment, we find a deficiency in the transmission layer or the transition layer, the middle layer, cytochrome B. The environment is anaerobic. Oh my. And so when we look at the transmutation of a cell, we see that we know that we have amino acids, which are the building blocks of life. And from that, we produce our DNA. And from that, we produce our ladder, a ladder which goes up to heaven. Imagine that within our cells. And you see all these phospholipids in pairs, encapsulating a cell. And we know that oil and water don't mix, and thank God for that, because otherwise these cells would just be mush. But energy is flowing all around, and there's a communication. And this is what's important. We find that our cells have a soul, and that soul is interacting with the RNA and the DNA. And when we cut ourselves and we need to be repaired, these cells, these blastema cells, begin cell production. And these cells are undifferentiated. We don't know what these cells are, but these are the healing cells. And once the damaged site has been cleaned and is prepared for building, then these cells stop cell production and they concentrate on differentiation. Unhealthy cells cannot stop this cell production. So excessive cell production in the wrong place is called cancer. And so the reason there is an inability for them to stop is because this communication that goes from inside to the cell to the outside of the cell, which we refer to as intracellular communication, is disrupted. And then, of course, if the communication within the cell is disrupted, maybe the communication from cell to cell, which we call intracellular communication, also gets disrupted. And, you know, how is this communication working? And fortunately, we have 73 trillion cells, so we have a lot of extra cells. Now, generally speaking, we have a small number of cells which are not functioning properly for whatever reason. And we have organisms in our body which digest these cells and convert them to food. Isn't that interesting? But when these functions aren't working properly, then we find that this lack of communication, shall we say, or this disruption of communication passes on to other groups of cells. And how fast it passes on obviously depends on the environment. And why would that not be normal? How fast is recovery is dependent on the environment, and how fast the decay is dependent on the environment. So now we understand that there are a lot of skills to learn. So when we look at the energy transfer states in the small m matter state, we found that these energy transfer states are the lower level. The interactive energy transfer states and the plasma state are higher, but they're not just higher by field state, they are higher by orders of magnitude. So the energy transfer state is higher, and this is the transcendence within the dimensions, within the range. And we can transcend these dimensions within the range in different ranges. And this is the brilliance of the new science. And to understand then, when we look at basic concrete growth, which we talked about within relationship to water, the universal solvent on this planet, we find that when we add water to cement, we are starting to create SiO4, which is your basic earth, which is like the Earth's crust. But not only does it create a hydration envelope, which is a rotating field around, and so we have a water envelope encapsulating the cement in the center. And so the energy is coming from the outside in, and as the cement in the center is being consumed and converted into concrete. So cement and concrete are two different elements. And then the concrete itself goes through various stages as well. And then we find that these kind of hairs grow, and they grow perpendicular to the tangent on the circular extremity. And the way they grow is rotating as well. So these are growing in a rotating fashion away from, shall we say, the magnetical surface of the hydration envelope. They are growing away from, and they are doing their own rotating field. And you see that in seashells. So first of all, the basic seashell is rotating to create its construct. But from the surface of the seashell, these pointy things are growing. And the way these pointy things are growing is they're conical. So in other words, they are fatter at the bottom and thinner at the top, which means that they're gravitational at the bottom and magnetical at the top, right? And they are growing perpendicular to the surface of the shell. Nature is trying to teach us lessons. And this is the point. They grow. Sentient beings grow. They have awareness. When they have awareness, they have sensitivity. As I said, we are carbon-based, so we are organic. The earth is silicon-based, it's inorganic. We have a soul. Seashells have a soul. Our cells have a soul, the earth has a soul. Our DNA has to have a soul. Has to have some kind of energy transmission, some kind of energy transition. And so we find that the predominant factor of the DNA is the transmission of energy, because the energy goes from cell to cell, from DNA to DNA. But the determining factor, of course, is not the DNA, because we have the same DNA in the left thumb as the right thumb. Well, how can you have the same thing and then be opposing? Okay, so happy DNA Day. The DNA is growing, and the reason for it is because life is for learning. And so life is in the consciousness, and the life is for learning, and so it enhances the DNA. Can the DNA grow and the RNA not grow? Really? I don't think so. When we look at Dino Kraspedon and his idea that God is a set of mutually perpendicular lines of force oscillating upon themselves, so we find the RNA and the DNA are perpendicular to each other and they're oscillating upon themselves. They have a rotating field, they have a helical structure. And the thing about it, as we go from point to point, we found that we have a path. Energy has to follow a path, right? It's not random. It follows a path, and that path is based on susceptibility. So we can say, well, here's one path that follows the x-axis, there's another path that follows the y-axis, and another path that follows the z-axis. But when we look at the core component of the hexagonal, or the box in this case, we say, well, there's a residue. Well, what is that residue? And you know, we're not taking that into account, which is kind of the same problem we're having with the periodic table of elements. So We understand also that plasma is positioning in the center, but we have two kinds of positioning that are possible. So if we look at a face, so it's in this side, we look at this box, which is kind of like, well, it's kind of like a cube, and it's kind of like a dice. And then you wonder, is life, a game of dice? Well, we have face centering, which is a plasma position on the center, which is in the middle of these paths. There's also body centering, which is in the center of the cube, which is the sum totality of all the energies that are following the path, that are energies accumulated in the faces, and the residue. Now, as we go into and get more energy, how do we contain that energy? So we find that our field strength can grow. All of you remember when you were a child, and the most distinct thing that you can remember is that you had to buy new clothes from time to time because you would outgrow your clothes. And so you were growing, you were getting larger. Well, this is what happens with our field strength. We still have the same DNA, if you will, and we still have the same basic Maggrav condition. But now, we're bigger. And so if we will look at these face-centered positions and how they move out from the face to accommodate that, an interesting comparison happens here. We look at the GANs freakout, and we see that the GANs particle is much larger than the nanoparticle. But although the GANs particle is bigger and technically should have less energy, it has many more points. One moment. What I'm saying is that these points and have energy, and the accumulation of all these points collectively have more energy than the nanostate. So this is why the GAN state is higher. So when we look at the basic physics of the X, Y, and Z axis, we find that something is missing, and yet we are capable of bringing in more energy. The point of the matter is that when we look at the periodic table of elements, what we are seeing is crystalline formations. And going back to 1953 or thereabouts, when they discovered the DNA, what happened was they discovered the crystalline formation of the DNA, and this was the beginning of the transcription or genome project, if you will. All that is taking into account the physicality. What we now know with the plasma science, that when you look at this picture, there is a well-organized plasma substructure. So when you're looking at this picture, you can't see the physicality. What you're looking at is the plasma reality. And to maintain this energy, there has to be a rotation, which we refer to as the x-axis. And then there has to be a polar complementary complement with the polarities, which we call the y-axis. And then, of course, there has to be a field strength determining how big is large. And that is determined by our ability to retain that energy and the giving and taking. So we have a rotating field. And within that rotating field, we have different energy states. And we can transition these various energy states and draw on what we need from the core. And we find that the Earth has two hemispheres, and they are both rotating fields, and the two work together. Isn't that kind of interesting? That's how our head works with our body. And we were talking about a backbone, and there's the stacker unit with the cups of life, the 5 cups of life. and we find that we are emitting energy from our spine to our extremities. How does that energy come back? And so this is the two-way street that we find with the plasma reality. When we look at these crystalline formations, when we look at these crystalline formations, we are none of these dimensions. We are not in the X and Y as a dimension. Question then is, are we the residue? Well, here's the point. When we look at the DNA, we find that the DNA is the same in all the cells. All the cells have the same DNA. All the cells have mitochondria. When we look at the DNA of the cellular structure of the vertical people, whichever plant it is, has a unique DNA. All the cells within the plant, whether it's the root, whether it's a stem, whether it's the leaf, whether it's the flower, or whether it's the pollen, has the same DNA. All the cells have mitochondria. The vertical people and the horizontal people have the mitochondria, and these mitochondria are the blast furnaces within the cells. The mitochondria have a different DNA. When we eat the vertical people, we consume their DNA. Does that DNA become a part of us? Their mitochondrial DNA is different. Does that mitochondrial DNA become a part of us? Our mitochondrial DNA is different, and our cellular DNA is different. I wonder what's going on. This is what I do know. Energy is transferred through a medium, which we call adenosine triphosphate. This is the currency of life. To understand the currency of life, if we look at our society, money is the currency of our society. It's the giving and taking of money, right? While in life, ATP, the giving and taking, is the currency of life. It's energy, energy in motion. And so now we understand that what is reality? Reality is actually a manifestation. When two fields come together, they form another. This formation of these fields coming together is the manifestation. But this manifestation, it comes from a plasma feeding. It's the plasma feeding that leads to the manifestation, and therefore the manifestation can be non-tangible or tangible, non-visible or visible, plasmatic or physical. So there is a plasmatic reality and a physical reality. So whatever the manifestation is a form artifact of the energy in motion. And so our emotion is a form artifact of energy in motion. And this is what we call the emotion of presence. Well, how, does that work? Well, we find that in our society, our focus is on disruption. You see, because the plasma manifestation precedes the physical manifestation. And we've come to the realization, and whether it's, in 1990 or 1953 or 1937, the physical manifestation may manifest differently in different people, but the plasmatic manifestation is the same. The physical manifestation may be, let's say, for instance, it could be obesity. It could be acidity of the blood, where we have blood pressure, or cancer. And we find there's a commonality, and that is the higher acidity causes obviously an anaerobic condition. It causes the expansion of the DNA, and it causes ATP reduction, and it causes the disruption of cellular communication, whether it's intercellular or intracellular. This is common knowledge. And so we look at now the cups of life, and how does this change things? So we said, well, life is a two-way street. And it's always dealing with either attraction or repulsion. And so we have a field. We call it a magnetical field. To balance that off, we have a gravitational field. The balance of those two form a maggrav condition, where the magnetical is the giving, the gravitational is the taking. The question is, can we give, and what do we give to, and can we take, and what do we take from? And so when we look at what we understand as the plasma science now, there has to be a maggrav condition, which is the balance of the attraction repulsion forces. And if it's attraction repulsion, that is magnetical. But if it's repulsion attraction, then it's gravitational. So the magnetical gravitational relationship is the addition to the maggrav condition. So in other words, a maggrav plus magnetical is the giving, a maggrav plus the gravitational is the taking. And so life is all about positioning. And that's why when we looked at the basic cups of life and we looked at the two most important components, and we had cup number 1 and cup number 2, this is what we need to concern ourselves with right now because of the way our society is going. So we look at the relationship between the zinc plate and the copper coil and the nano-coated copper coil, and we created a field, a magnetical field. And then, of course, we created a gravitational field, and this gives us a balance. And then when we look inside of the cup and we say, well, what all is going on? So we find that not only do we have a relationship between one pair, but we have a relationship with another pair, and that this other pair has a relationship. And so can we translate this relationship interaction to our DNA? And we see how all of those codons within the DNA, the 3.2 billion codons, how they are all interacting. And do they choose what they interact with? No, they choose to interact with everything because that's our DNA. And we are complex beings in a complex society. And however, life is very simple. There's a giving and taking, and all we have to do is work with the universe. And so we created the basic zinc GaNs and the copper GaNs, and from those two we created the CO2 GaNs. And then we created an amino acid, which is the connector and the bodybuilder of life. And of course, when we create amino acid, we also create water. And then the second cup is done the same way. We just replaced the copper plate instead of the zinc plate, but we still have a magnetical field and we still have a gravitational field. And then when we look at the two cups and the relationship between the two cups, and there has to be a relationship because they are interacting with the physical environment. So we have an emotional cup and a physical cup, and then each is operating the same way. There's an interaction of fields within the cup. But when we just remember that when we're looking at the creation of the basic batches, which we need, one, the cup of one to help our emotional context, and cup two to help our physical context, keep these a meter apart. Okay, because fields interact and they are not retained by the boundary of the physicality. In fact, you cannot even see the boundary of the physicality, but each of them collectively has a magnetical gravitational field. And so the purpose of the cups of life was to kind of eradicate the virus. Well, the virus is an energy pack. And so we either give and take energy. So we were looking at cup number 1 to deplete the energy, and cup number 2 also wants to deplete the energy. But in this case, we're also depleting and converting the energy, kind of like the way we digest things. And so when we can put the two cups together, and not just the two cups, but in this case, the emotional being the gravitational because it's the higher energy, and the physical being the magnetical giver because it is the lower energy. And we see that there is a magnetical field collectively around the two cups. And then of course, there's a gravitational field that derives from that. And we know that this energy, strong energy, is at the center, because when we look at how our GaNs production and we say, well, look, in the middle of my GANs, there's nothing there. Well, obviously there is something there. And that energy that you're seeing that created that hole in the GANs is the plasma energy. And so when someone asks you, well, what is plasma? Just tell them it's a kind of energy state and it's affecting our life because it's very important. The questions that everybody is asking, is it backwards or is it upside down? But really, what we need to figure out is our point of view earthbound or spacebound? So what has hindered us is the old physics and its limitations. And we have broken through not only the scientific and spiritual limitations, but on DNA Day here, we've broken through the biological limitations. And so we have other limitations that we have to go through. So KFTV is the TV station of the Keshe Foundation, where the science actually meets the soul of man for peace. And so, although this is the Keshe Foundation Canadian Spaceship Institute, we have conducted classes, 21 classes with the KF Brazilian educational team. We have conducted 15 of the 21 classes with the Italian educational team. We are doing that and continuing to do that on Monday afternoons. We are now going to begin the Hispanic education series on Monday evenings, beginning the first of 21 classes starting tomorrow. One grows and adds to another. And very shortly, I think we're going to see great news coming from the United States, where the lack of morality and the compassion for the fellow man and the genuine courage that it needs to enter into the new age is going to come together. It has to come together because we're all looking for a kind of satisfaction. This plasma satisfaction involves on this planet the restoration of the physical and emotional vitality, but there's also plasma vitality. And this is where the plasma science is going. And we are now understanding that there's more coming with the universal body enhancement spaceship units than what first met the eye. And this all has to do with plasma interaction because all things are working in combination. So we could say there's a basic pulling and a pushing, but pulling and a pushing from what? And so we are always looking for a MAGRAF condition from us personally. But that MAGRAF condition is our MAGRAF condition plus a residue. Gives you something to think about, you see, because we have to open ourselves up to the energy of the universe, yield to those powers because they are very powerful, and allow that to happen. When you allow yourself and position yourself, you can receive that energy. So the key to this whole thing is you provide the pattern, you get the energy. And that energy is always there for the taking. And so we like to play games. So one of the games we like to play is tic-tac-toe. And I promised you that I would tell you whose turn it is. Well, we've run into a problem, you see, because the new plasma cube does not fit into this two-dimensional representation of this game. How can you have tic-tac-toe when you only have 2 dimensions? So the discussion of whose turn it is not going to be discussed today. Sorry. How do you like me now? We're just the messengers of peace and friendship. Okay, this is what we have to do because the plasma universe works this way. And this information is brought by the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute into the public domain. All we ask is for world peace. Sign a world peace treaty. Once with a pen, once with your heart, how about once with your soul? Bring the harmony and vitality to this planet through our physical and emotional being. Knowledge seekers become truth seekers. That's not enough. will truth seekers become difference makers. This dynamic plasma state that is within us is representative of the universal language that is throughout. And on this day today, understand that plasma science needs to be delivered in exchange for peace on Earth. Thank you. Thank you all for listening and allowing me to present. Over to you, Mark.
Beautiful presentation, Alex. You must be a very wealthy man since you've discovered how to balance out the cancer in a cell or in a body. And that was back in 1990s, you said?
Well, I must tell you that from 1983 to 1991, the only subject that we discussed, there was no other discussion, none, was how to pay for the cancer treatment, which amounted to about $500 a week. You did the math. I don't have to pay that anymore, and I haven't since 1991.
That is a tremendous undertaking you went through. You must have researched knowledge across the world.
Yes, and I wanted to share that knowledge, and one of my goals has been to, share that with people, and this forum has allowed me to do that. The number of people who wanted to listen, however, has been underwhelming to say the least. Anyway, we carry on because we can sleep in peace knowing that we have the capability and the technology to eradicate many of the maladies that are affecting this planet. That's the only comment I'm going to make on that subject. Thanks, Mark.
So it sort of dovetails into this knowledge in a way, or was this something new that you've come across? Or was it you were understanding it more in the matter state, but now you understand it more in the plasmatic understanding?
Well, that's correct. That's correct. And then so, part of my disclaimer is I have no access to classified or confidential information, and I have no access to the advanced research. I am just an average Joe Muck and Fudge, and I just want people to be happy.
Great. If we could take a minute or two, I noticed there's some new people in the participants list. Would they like to, maybe they've been knowledge seekers for many years, but I just haven't noticed them or noticed their name. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from? One I see is Anton Dan. Maybe you've been a knowledge seeker for some time. It looks like you have an infinity loop next to your name in a way with the yellow color. Or Carmen, have you been with us before?
You see it in the knowledge seeker of Mr. Cash many times from
Okay.
215 or 14. He's from Romania.
Uh-huh. I know we had Ballas Dan and now we have Anton Dan. Anyone else who'd like to introduce themselves and tell us where you're from, perhaps? That's new to our group. You may not be new to the Cash Foundation or the plasma technology, but introduce yourself.
Okay, I am Alen Cadet from Honduras. Initially I'm from Nicaragua, but I'm at the moment in Honduras. And I am new to the group.
And what brought you here? Was it the cup of life or something different?
No, about 8 or 9 years ago, I had a heart attack, and then I was immobilized, and I was lucky that the internet is available. So I started looking for something to learn while I was in bed. And that's how I don't know how did I find it, but then I started watching the videos of the Kesh Foundation, and then I started practicing the nano coding. And but afterwards, I could not follow it. And about a year ago, I had the time because I couldn't do anything. I was confined, and then I began again to listen and watch the videos, and began again um, trying to make the cups. And I've done both, but I need to go further. Thank you. Thank you very much for all these teachings and motivating us to learn more and practice more. Thank you to you all, and thank you to Mr. Kesh for all this beautiful knowledge. Thank you.
And thank you from Honduras.
Yes.
Have you pledged your nation to peace?
Well, I am here because I was here when the confinement began with the virus, and I was only to stay here about 4 months because I was going to restore a house I wanted to sell in here in San Pedro Sula. So I am not really living in Honduras, but I am from Nicaragua, but I've been here for more than a year now because of the coronavirus. So I hope I can go back next month, and maybe I can find a way to do that in Nicaragua.
Excellent. I know the Chinese are working quite extensively in Nicaragua. I think they're working on some projects, but
Yes,
quite a
there
bit.
is a how do you call it, canal,
Yes.
a channel that will go through to the southern part of Nicaragua, and some lakes that are there. So it is true. They are very active.
I'd like to bring up another point, Mark, sorry to
Oh,
interject.
oh, no, please.
We are, the Mexican team is part of this presentation today, but tomorrow evening, the Spanish community is amalgamating as the Hispanic community, and that includes Spain, South America, Central America, Mexico, all Spanish speaking, is going to be part of the new KF Hispanic education team. And so that's beginning tomorrow. And Liliana is, I think, the, shall we say, the main pusher of the system, in conjunction with Victor in Spain, who is the Universal Council support member.
Yeah, that would be the promoter.
I think Liliana is simulcasting your teaching here today, Alex.
Yes.
Actually, the Spanish community has been simulcasting on all the Brazilian and English classes, and they have upwards to sometimes over 150 members simulcasting. So we have 56 today at this point in time. So you understand that there's a lot going on in the background.
And just for Alenka, you know, we do have the public workshop called, which is put on by the Universal Council, which is One Planet, One Nation, One Race for World Peace. And it's going to be very powerful and very great when we have dissolved the borders. Mr. Kesh has said in the past, the borders are already gone. So we'll be all as one nation, one planet, one race for world peace. And this will be a very beautiful time for all of humanity, where we can travel without passports, just the way the birds and the whales do around the planet, and visit many places we haven't seen and elevate people there as we travel. So thank you. And again, myself, I had discovered, well, I had read an article, I think on Yahoo News, maybe 10 years ago, where they talked a short article about Mr. Kesh being in Italy and this MagRev system he was coming up with. And I sort of wished him well and didn't know that you could even join the foundation. It didn't say anything about that. It just gave this little blurb about a scientist working in Italy, bringing free energy, or not free energy, but very inexpensive energy, let's say, to this planet. And then, of course, as I found Mr. Kesh on Project Camelot, that's solidified my soul, or my understanding that I wanted to become part of this, because it was a very beautiful teaching or explanation he gave there with Carrie Cassidy. And that's what allowed me to come into the foundation, let's say. Anyone else who's here who'd like to introduce themselves to us and tell us what country you're from? Many have been here many times, but I just thought I'd give them an opportunity to open up and share their name and where they're from and any other comments. Thank you, Alenka.
Mark, don't forget to ask regarding the paint pen, new paint pen, to point Susie. When it's time, when it's...
Sure. Sure, we won't forget. I know in the back, go ahead. Did someone want to say something? I know while you were teaching, Alex, I was just looking in the background for some of these angel wings that Da Vinci had drawn or put in some of his pictures. And I was wondering if we could show those, but maybe we'll hold off. Is there anyone who'd like to ask Alex a question? I thought it was quite profound, Alex, when Mr. Kesh had shared with us the idea of when the sperm and the egg comes together, that the physicality is really just the afterthought. And I guess all the souls on the sperm side and all the souls on the egg side decide the creation of that physicality. But that was a new understanding for me, to think that these fields actually do the creating, and the physicality that's manifest is really the afterthought of these fields. Would you want to comment on that, or does that go along with your teaching in a way today?
Fundamentally, Mark, you understand that the DNA is in every cell, and you have to ask yourself, the question is, how was that created? And who was the person of the 7 billion people on this planet who created that? And so the answer is none. So therefore, it's not from our physicality, is it? And so that becomes the first answer. And then from there, you start to go on the path. And then this was the revelation that, happened to me, was to understand how the deterioration of the health came about. And I said, well, that's not really what I'm interested in. I just wanted to get rid of the cancer, and get back to my life. But, what I found out was that the whole basis and the whole structure of our society was based on the sucker principle, and I was the sucker. And as long as I paid, and as long as I played, and as long as I could continue to pay, then I could pay. But when the money ran out, then I couldn't play anymore. And somehow, some way, I did this for 8 years. Well, 80,000 Canadians die every year from cancer. In the last 16 months, we've had 23,000 people die from COVID in Canada. We've never had a lockdown for cancer, but we have a lockdown right now in Ontario, Canada. We are locked down severely. And these teachings are in public domain. So you have to ask yourself the question, why? And as I said, why is not the question, why is the answer?
Mr. Kesh must be a very patient man because, well, as a father with a child, I was thinking, and the child is just babbling some baby talk, but the father is just waiting and hoping that the child will come out with the first words or first word as some sort of confirmation that things are going on the right path. And I know I don't know very much at all about this knowledge. I'm trying to absorb more as time goes on and in different meetings and taking what I can. But I wonder sometimes if he chuckles to himself about the way we talk and the way we share knowledge. And but he has so much patience that I'm sure he's waiting to see this creation elevate in a way to where we'll all be sharing a very strong and similar understanding of this knowledge. Ed, your mic is open. Would you like to say something?
Well, I wanted to ask a question of Alex to see if he had any insight of what Mr. Cash presented in the last Knowledge Seekers workshop. And I'll describe it here and hopefully I've got it correct. But Alex, maybe you could correct me along the way if I don't have it. But he talked about that the backbone of the DNA was the phosphor. And I'm assuming that that's the plasmatic energy of the phosphor. Would that be correct?
One of the discoveries that you've keep focusing on, Ed, is the uncertainty principle. And I would like to eliminate that principle and introduce the certainty principle. Your understanding is 100% correct. There's a difference between the physicality and the plasmatic energy. And there's a transition, there's a transition between the two.
Yes. And he indicated that both phosphorus and sulfur were like a dividing point in the table of periodic elements. And he indicated that there was a balance point there in the mass weight there that indicated an equal number of protons and neutrons. And I just glanced at the periodic table to try to confirm this in my own understanding. And I did notice that when you get beyond phosphorus, as you go higher and higher, the mass number gets more than double, indicating that there's, an excess of neutrons, I think. But that dividing point there at the phosphorus sulfur level was the reason why it was the backbone. And I wondered if that had any significance in our Earth environment there. Why is that, and how? I don't know. Do you have any insight on that? I just can't get much past that.
Again, Ed, well, you're your own worst enemy, and I'm not being harshly critical of you. You have a tremendous depth of understanding, and the confidence in yourself is really what's lacking. Because, but this is not just you. This is everybody. Because, except for a few people present, none of us are scientists. We're scientists in the kitchen or in the basement or a garage or wherever. And so we are able to do our plasma science, in those forums, but we're not plasma scientists, and most of us have no interest in understanding the details. It isn't the details that I want to convey and discuss. It's this observation that you have made with respect to the generalities. You're seeing a trend. So you're 100% correct. This is the point. You need to know that that is your foundation. That when you see this trend, you don't have to have a microscope to understand which way the energy is flowing. And, you know, in terms of physicality, you can look at the surface to volume ratio, and then you understand which way the energy is flowing. But in the plasma science, now we know that the energy is flowing both ways. And in order to flow both ways, there has to be a substrate. And so how does that energy interact? And that is your plasma interaction. So now if you can get within your mind's eye to see the plasma interaction and the field interaction, and you would have to do this with your mind's eye. And why can you do this with your mind's eye? Because your mind's eye is operating in a higher field strength than your physical eye. So you have this greater capability. And the moment you have this confidence, not only within yourself, but to have this confidence in the universe, to understand that the universe provides. It provides as much energy as you need whenever you need it. The universe is a benevolent place. And your soul is a product of this universal energy. And for us to understand how our soul functions into that is what's all part of the Knowledge Seekers workshops, and how we're trying to progress step by step by step. The tremendous revelation that has happened within the last 2 weeks is not only how we can operate on a plasma level, but how we can reposition ourselves on a physical level, and how that capability is within our sphere of influence. And our sphere of influence is dependent on our understanding and our vision of our scheme. And it's it's ours all the way down the line. So we have a capability of creating our physicality. We have always had this capability. It has just been a matter of understanding it, and it's been a matter of coping with it. So the transmission or the communication of this knowledge and the confidence in this knowledge stems from, shall we say, the backbone, which is equivalent to courage. And when you have this courage to stand up and, shall we say, express yourself, but not express yourself just as a form of protest, but express yourself as a co-creator. You don't have to bear the burden of creation. You're part and parcel of the co-creation. So all of us present at this meeting today are co-creators. And collectively, we are transmitting this energy through the plasma fields that we're creating on this planet. Some of us are setting up artificial barriers. And many of us are starting to break down our own personal barriers. And so my point to you is, first of all, I'm totally gratified with the questions that you're asking, because they're brilliant questions, they're fundamental questions, and we're not asking these questions enough. And secondly, it's opening up to the new knowledge. The new knowledge is there. We just have to open ourselves up to allow that to happen. And so what I'm showing on this screen is a tremendous push that the Brazilian team has made. This is dwarfed in comparison to the tremendous push that the Iranian community has made. And now we see the complementary efforts coming from the Hispanic community, and the efforts that we were doing here in the North American community and the arrival of the international community. The international community as a whole is the Keshe Foundation. We are all part of the Keshe Foundation, and we are all cells within the whole body. And this is the beauty of the whole thing. And we will have peace on earth. Yes, we will. Because that's not just our wish, that's the universal wish. Thanks for your question, Ed. Another brilliant question.
Well, thank you, Alex. I'm not trying to be overly technical in a way. I know I may come across that way, but I'm trying to, honestly, I'm just trying to understand. I mean, Mr. Keshe shares these things with us, and they're in the, I mean, it's in the realm of knowledge, you know. And I just can't help but believe it has significance to help us understand the simplicity of how we're supposed to accomplish this. You know, the essence of our soul and our physicality is what he's teaching us, and how our soul can expand in the dilution of our physicality. And the reason I ask these questions, and they may seem technical, but I'm just assuming that for us to come to understand this on a mental level, at least some way, is going to help us just understand the feeling or the inner understanding of what it means to accomplish, you know, to understand this relationship between our soul and our physicality, that we become more in control of things.
You see, Ed, generally speaking, like, you know, throughout your life, have you ever asked yourself, how did I become an adult from having been a child? You know, and how did you do that, Ed? You know, did you have a rack in your bedroom where every night you stretch yourself? So something has happened physiologically to allow that to happen. And then, you know, thank God for you that you were created in the wonderful image that you were created. And how did you do that? So you never ask these questions. And the other problem, of course, is who would you ask? You know, when I asked my doctor, you know, why I got sick, and he says, I don't know. And then I jokingly say, well, I could have gone to the baker, and at least I would have got a muffin, because he doesn't know either. So, you know, when you assign your responsibility to someone else, and you assign your dependence on someone else, undependability is not something to depend on. And life is interdependent. And the dependability of someone else's undependability does not constitute dependability. Okay, surety is in the knowledge, and the knowledge surety is in the truth. And so as knowledge seekers, we find the truth. Are we prepared to accept the truth? Well, it all depends on your scheme of reference. And if your scheme of reference is tied within, let's say, a tiny perfect world, and you ignore the rest of the world, okay, well, you're working within a certain kind of, shall we say, plasmatic field reference. But if we understand that we are part and parcel of the whole universe, and that there is a greater oneness out there, and that we're part of that, well, gee whiz, you know, if we're all striving to be better than what we are, you know, this gives us a new opportunity, and it gives us an opportunity right now within our life, not some other life or not somewhere down the road. Right now, we have the opportunity right now. And the thing is, we create our own environment, and then we can expand that environment. So how much of these details do you want to know? That is part of the wonder and the fun of academia. But with the pandemic situation the way it is, we don't have time for fun. In fact, we're at the point now where the blame for the pandemic is based on our social gathering and our interaction as physical human beings. We're to blame. We're to blame for the problem. Seriously? You've got to be kidding. So there's more. And we have that opportunity to learn more. And we also have the opportunity to have a choice how much we want to do. I had no choice. Prior to 1991, I only had one choice: pay or die. That was it. And you know who does that? Who threatens your life if you can't produce? The word is terrorist. We are a peaceful foundation. We're bringing peace to humanity, not exclusively. We are not alone. We're not the only operators. The whole universe is supporting us. All we have to do is open ourselves to allow the possibilities. I'm so happy with this discussion, Ed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex.
So just to repeat, Alex, you're going to be sharing in the Spanish language community in Mexico tomorrow evening. I hope someone puts it into the chat so that those who want to join will be able to join. I'm sure there's a special room number for that.
Yes, it is. It has always been one of the 2 Spanish classes that have been presented on the private teaching list, but it is a public class. And I'm sure that either Helenka or Liliana, somebody will post it on the various Telegram postings.
Thank you for your service to the community.
Can I ask a question to Alex? Please.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. I joined Bengali teaching. I'm Selena Rahman from the Georgia. So I asked a question to the Moshfek about a long time ago. I'm a little bit nervous, forgive me. I asked a question to Moshfek about mountain goat. A long time ago, I saw a documentary about mountain goat. When they need the salt or amino acid for them, so they go to top to the hill, and then they suck the salt, and it is too high and very dangerous place, but they go for their need. But we are human beings. We don't know what we need, what is our body need. So why mountain goat knows what they need and we don't know what our body need? What is the reason? What is the lack in our mind or our knowing? That is the question. Do you understand?
Well, that's a $64,000 question. You know, we are so smart, and yet we don't exhibit that, not really. And I've seen a movie of a mountain goat climb up a mountain. And if I had hard hooves like the goat had, I'd probably get up a few feet and then I'd slide back down. I wouldn't be able to do that. But, you know, a lot has to do with the believability and the courage and everything else. So I don't have the specific answer to your question, except it's amazing that somehow, some way, that goat has that knowledge. And so somehow, some way, we have restricted ourselves in our knowledge. And all of this has been reflected in the disruption of our communication channels. And what we have been focusing on greatly has been our physical communication channels. So the conclusion has to be is that the goat has a channel communication beyond the physical communication. He doesn't have a cell phone, you know, and he doesn't have people waving flags or honking on horns to indicate when you're, you know, going in the right direction. And there's a determination to go there. So this is what's brought us to the Keshe Foundation. You see this inherent determination. And so a lot of us are questioning now how we got here and why we got here. So why we got here is the answer. This is what I'm saying. We got here for a reason. What we need to explore is, what are we trying to achieve? Just waiting for the internet to settle. So what we're trying to achieve is the essence of our life. Okay, because each of us individually are trying to achieve that. So we can see nature all around us demonstrating these capabilities. And every time we compare that capability with our capability, and then we go, wow, you know, what am I missing? And that's the essence of your question. What are you missing? And I'm still amazed. I don't have the specific answer. However, what I do know is that salamanders can grow limbs. I can't. I know the chameleons can change color. I can't. Okay, so I know the goats can climb up a steep slope. Even I seen a picture on YouTube where a goat was climbing up the side of a dam wall, which is made out of concrete. I can't do that. So I can't do it doesn't mean it can't be done. All it means is that I can't do it. I don't know how to do it, or I haven't accepted within my own understanding how to do that. So that's my own personal limitation, and nothing wrong with that. Okay, now we have an awareness that there's more that's going on. And so when you compare your knowledge to the knowledge, say, of a dragonfly or a butterfly or a daisy or a stalk of corn or, you know, a kitten or a goat, and you see your knowledge compared to their knowledge, one of the questions that comes up is, our knowledge really worth that much more when we can't do what they do? And is that the requirement? Is it a requirement for us to do what they do? I mean, do you want to relate yourself to an ant? An ant has 6 legs. An ant has 6 legs and we have 2 legs. Do you want to relate yourself to an amoeba? Who doesn't have legs, has cilia, hairs. It's a single-celled organism. A single cell. We're 73 trillion cells. So technically speaking, we should do more. But we can't even control our own cells. You know, how did we grow from a baby to a child, from a child to an adult? How do we do that? So these are all phenomenal questions. And we haven't really collectively come up with all the answers because we're still preoccupied with our tiny perfect day-to-day world. So now we have an understanding that our physicality is a manifestation of our physical reality. And that's what we really need to focus on. And that physical reality is limited by understanding of our plasma reality. But that's with respect to our soul growth, not respected to our existence. Our existence on this planet, however, is limited in our total understanding. And so we never stop learning. This is the beauty. This is the beauty of the knowledge. So even, you know, I teach this class, all I do is expose the limitations of my own knowledge. And maybe it's not obvious to you, but it sure is obvious to me. I hope I've answered your question. That's
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you very much. Thank you very much.
pleasure. Thank you.
And I think we do have some knowledge of what we want because let's say I'm thinking about an orange, but I don't have any oranges in the house. I eat and I'm satisfied, but yet that thought of having an orange or the fields of the orange are still coming to me, and I go to the store and buy an orange. Or maybe it's beets. For some reason you haven't eaten beets in a year, but all of a sudden they're on your mind. I think the body is giving us some sort of indication through the brain that there's something in there that's needed. Just like with the buffet, when we go to the buffet, we take certain things and we think we're taking them, but maybe it's the body that's actually putting that thought there, saying we need something from that. We need to extract something from that, and you need to find that product.
Yes, I think that is true. I think, yeah, that is right. We don't listen to the body. Most of the time we are busy with other stuff, unusual stuff. We don't listen our body. That's why we are having that much problem in our body.
So Lamia asks if someone can put the Zoom number for Alex's classes. If someone would do that, maybe Lissy, you would know the number. If you can put that in the chat, we'll all have it. For what time does it start, Alex, on Monday?
It'll be 2400 Central European time.
Okay. And also we want to mention Jalal's class. That'll start at 10 a.m. tomorrow in the private students Zoom room. So if you're available, we've been opening, it's called Deciphering Knowledge Seekers Workshops, and Jalal has been gracious enough to share his knowledge with all of us. And this is an ongoing series.